Hey everybody, this is Tracy here with another edition of A View from Tracy's Point. And yes, you get two videos from me tonight. And if my eyes are coming across as bloodshot red, it is because my allergies are out of control today and I'm tired. Okay, so I'm going to try and get through this as quickly as possible because there was a lot that went on today. So Richard Arline, you guys remember him. He is the one that was caught trying to bribe Azriel Clary not to testify against R. Kelly. And so he has entered into a plea. He negotiated a plea with the Eastern District of New York. And so they had a hearing today where he officially pled guilty. And so he was facing one count of bribery or trying to bribe a witness. And so he pleaded guilty to that. And you guys, just a little backstory, if you're not familiar with this, Richard Arline, a guy named Michael Williams, and then another guy named Don Russell were all indicted last year as the Eastern District of New York is trying to build an enterprise. Because, you guys, we kept saying, one man can't be an enterprise. Like, where are all the other people, the co-conspirators? And then when the Eastern District of New York kept denying him the opportunity to get released while he awaits trial, they kept saying that he was such a threat, and everybody was like, well, where is the threat? Who's been threatened? And then all of a sudden, miraculously, we get these 3 indictments, which was supposed to build the enterprise. So Richard Arline, was recorded having these conversations between him and Azriel, him and like 3 other people. Like, we never really knew who the other 3 or 4 people were. We were only guessing. And I'm going to be honest with you, this was like 6 months ago and I really don't remember who I said. But what I am going to do is I'm going to drop a link right up here so you can go back to my original video where I talked about his indictment and his arrest, and you guys can listen to who I said. We did confirm that one of the people was Dr. Rice, who has a YouTube channel. He's a content creator on YouTube. And so none of these other people, to our knowledge, has been indicted, in connection with this bribery. And so here's a short article on what happened today, and then I will bring you guys some more information. And so this is from, I think it was the Law and Crime website. It says, a longtime friend of R. Kelly admitted in federal court Tuesday, which was today, that he offered an unnamed woman, who we know as Azriel, money so that she would drop claims that the R&B singer began a relationship with her when she was 17. And hold on a second, let me get this out of the way. You guys know, for some reason, when I am trying to do these videos, my cursor gets stuck. So Richard Arline Jr. was indicted in August of last year, along with 2 others from Kelly's inner circle, on charges that they had tried to extort or intimidate victims of an alleged ring of women and girls that Kelly, 54, was accused of running. So we're going to stop right there because there is no proof whatsoever that R. Kelly knows Richard Arline, had any type of friendship or relationship with this man. There's no proof of him ever knowing the Michael Williams guy. And Cash Jones herself came out and said that R. Kelly had never met Michael Williams, who is her cousin, that they have never spoken to each other, and therefore, there is no way that R. Kelly paid him to go and set this fake fire at the Clary's home that really isn't their home. Looked like they were in like one of those rental communities, those Airbnb communities. So that whole case with Michael Williams is very suspect. But there's no indication that him and this Richard Arline guy were friends or longtime acquaintances, as they are trying to paint in these articles that they're putting out. Arline entering his guilty plea in Brooklyn via video conference Tuesday, admitting that he offered the woman money between May and June of 2000. The recordings catch Arline discussing a proposal to send the woman $500,000 in exchange for no longer cooperating with law enforcement, making clear that he has access to R. Kelly's funds. The woman told Arline that she wouldn't go for $500,000 and that she would need $1 million and an initial transfer of funds within 24 hours, according to Arline's indictment. And I think when it was all over, said and done, he was supposed to give her $300,000. But of course, he didn't have $300. R. Kelly don't even have $300,000. So the whole setup was just so poorly done and so suspect. Like, why in the world, if R. Kelly could reach out and touch somebody, that he would orchestrate such utter nonsense, that he would jeopardize his case where he has been denied bond multiple times, that he would reach out and think that he would get away with doing something like this. He's in federal custody where all of his mail is, is read, is monitored, is scanned, is probably sent over to, the people at the Eastern District of New York. His phone calls are recorded. So when did he have time to talk to any of the people that were included in that indictment, that were part of this conversation that was taking place? When would he have gotten that message to Arline, or even taken the risk or taken the chance that, he would get caught doing that? So during one call, Arline mentions claims that the woman has iPads or videos of Kelly that could be used against him, and says they just want them to disappear. You know what I'm saying? Other intercepted communications have Arline discussing plans to pay a victim to, quote unquote, be quiet, and explaining that, quote, she got too much. Then it goes on to say Arline admitted Tuesday, which was today, that he and another person made the offer to trade money to keep the electronics away from investigators. Quote, I know what I did was wrong and I was sorry, end quote, Arline said at the end of a short statement. During a pause in proceedings and audio technical glitches were sorted out, a male-sounding voice on the phone line could be heard saying, quote, send him to Lewisburg, end quote, seemingly in reference to high-security federal prison in Pennsylvania. Quote, I don't understand why he's not going to Lewisburg, end quote, the person continued. Now, this is just another instance of the nonsense, that is taking place, and how they are trying to, build on this case, just like creating chaos. Because when you call in on the line, and when you get the instructions to call in, it says that everybody is muted, and that the people that are supposed to be on the call, the judge, the defendant, and the prosecutors, that they would be giving a separate access code to call in so that they can talk and communicate with the judge. So I couldn't understand why there were so many people on the line. We kept getting this interference and this talking. And then at one point, the judge accidentally muted, well, maybe it wasn't an accident, or maybe that's where the chatter was coming from, but she muted the line of one of the United States assistant attorneys, thinking that the chatter was coming from her. Then when it continued, she said, okay, well, maybe it's me that, this is taking place. And so she had all these windows open, all these programs open. So she, got off the call, or put us on hold, and closed out all these windows, and then she came back. So maybe there was another hearing going on that she was listening to, where the Lewisburg comment was coming into play. I'm not sure. but, that could be heard over the call that was taking place. So it goes on and it says Arline is set to be sentenced in June. And I believe the date was June 9th that they gave him. There's no minimum sentence for his federal bribery charge, but the count carries a maximum sentence of 15 years. Arline's attorney did not immediately respond to a request for comment. Charged along with Arline last August was Kelly's manager, Don Russell, which is not true. Don Russell, as we know him, was never R. Kelly's manager, but they continue to perpetuate that lie that he was his manager. Don Russell stepped in after R. Kelly did that song, I Admit, and said that he wanted to help him, but he was not R. Kelly's manager and he was never on R. Kelly's payroll. And so Russell is said to have threatened to leak photos and information about victims if they didn't quit cooperating with the government. And the truth of that statement is the charges that Don Russell is facing is in connection to, one, the Faith Rogers case, where he allegedly was going to start this website. He was going to out her. He had photos of her that he was allegedly posting on social media and that stuff. And then the other thing was when Surviving R. Kelly, the first one, they were going to have a screening and somebody called in a bomb threat. And that person was allegedly Don Russell that did that. And R. Kelly never told him to do that. He never told him to contact Faith Rogers, threaten her, or do any of those things. He never told Don Russell to do those things. So let's be clear on that. Now, this week was going to be a very busy week for the Eastern District of New York, because today was the Richard Arline hearing where he was going to plead guilty. Tomorrow was supposed to be Michael Williams' turn to plead guilty, but then he came up and said that he was sick and couldn't participate. So his hearing has been delayed to March 15th, I believe it is. And then on Thursday, Don Russell is supposed to have a status hearing. And you guys remember that Don Russell also entered into plea negotiations back in the latter part of 2020, like around November, maybe October, November-ish. And so it doesn't seem like he has gotten to the point where they have offered him a deal. And so this is my thought on what is going on. Just my thought, guys. It's not written anywhere. It's just my opinion from just, reading along and listening along as to what is going on. I don't think that the prosecution has been able to come up with anything that would tie R. Kelly to the Richard Arline or to Michael Williams. But they can connect him to Don Russell because we know there's video footage out there of, when he was at the cigar bar after he was released, after being taken into custody back in March of 2019 or the end of February 2019. And they went to the cigar bar. Don Russell was with him. Don Russell, seems to have a lot of information on the case, was supposedly trying to help him with his tax issues and all that stuff. So they can connect R. Kelly to Don Russell. I don't think they can connect R. Kelly to Richard Arline or to Michael Williams. So my thought is what they are going to do is get Richard Arline and possibly Michael Williams. I think they've already gotten Richard Arline to do it, but because the document is sealed, we don't know what Richard Arline's plea agreement contains. But if I was a betting person, I would say that Richard Arline has told them that Don Russell was the one that told him to go and bribe Azriel. And then I think what they're going to do is try and use that information to force Don Russell to try and turn on R. Kelly and say that somehow he got the message from R. Kelly to reach out to the Richard Arline guy to do all of this stuff, right? Because we know that Richard Arline signed a plea deal with the Eastern District of New York. Even though they didn't spell it out in the call today, there was a plea deal that was taking place. And two reasons I know there was a plea deal that was taking place is actually three reasons. One was the fact that the judge asked him, she told him, she said, it wasn't Ann Dunley, the judge that heard that case today. Hold on a second. The judge that heard the case, her name was Magistrate Judge Peggy Kuo, K-U-O. And so she told him that, in pleading guilty, that he could allow her to impose the sentence that he would receive, or he could allow Ann Dunley to impose the sentence. He said he wanted Ann Dunley to impose the sentence. Why did he want Ann Dunley to impose the sentence? Is because he has to fulfill some obligation, even though they're saying that, he had to, say all these things about he wasn't promised anything in return, he wasn't coerced, any of that good stuff to make this plea that he was doing this on his own. We know that there was a plea agreement that was signed. So the fact that he wanted to wait for Ann Dunley, she gonna hook him up, okay, to sentence him, that was the first red flag. Okay, he done entered a plea agreement where he has given them some information that they think that they can use down the line. The second reason is because at the end of the call, after they went through all the formalities, making sure that he understood that, once he accepted this plea agreement and pled guilty, that he couldn't turn around after he got sentenced. If he doesn't like the sentence, that, he can turn around and say, okay, well, I want to change my mind about the plea agreement, because what he's being charged with has a maximum penalty of 15 years and then a minimum fine of $250,000. It's some crazy stuff, and he could be charged 3 times the $250,000. And so he, instead of getting that, after he, said he understood, that pleading guilty, would result in all this stuff, we get towards the end of the call. And as the woman is, repeating everything back to him, making sure that he understands what he's agreeing to, they said that when he is sentenced by Judge Ann Dunley on June 9th or whatever day in June, that the sentence is going to occur, that he is not facing more than 22 months. So that's a big drop from 15 years to 22 months. The most they are going to give him is 22 months. Why would they be so lenient and offer him that, when the whole purpose of them arresting him was to try to connect him to R. Kelly as part of this enterprise that does not exist? So we know that he has given them information that they are going to try and use in some other capacity. I don't know if another indictment is going to come out where somebody else is going to be arrested. I don't know. I mean, I believe that what they're going to do is try to get Don Russell some kind of way ensnarled and entangled, that he says something that is going to build this enterprise that they need for this racketeering charge against R. Kelly, to get him to say that R. Kelly told him to do these things. Somehow they are using the Richard Arline guy as a pawn in this game to flip Don Russell. So, and then the last thing is, if the man has pled guilty, okay, I did it. If that was all to it, they could have sentenced him today. Instead, they're not going to sentence him to June. Why June? Because if R. Kelly goes on trial as planned in April, the trial will be over by June, and then they can determine how much his testimony helped them, right? So if it really, really helped them, then they might give him probation. If it didn't help them, then he's going to be stuck with the 22 months and whatever financial penalty they may decide that he has. So the hearing today made it seem like he just pled guilty. You know, he was like, I don't want to fight this anymore. And he just pled guilty. But when you really, really listen to what was said on that call, it was evident that he has provided them with information that they plan to use in order to build their case against R. Kelly. And I don't believe that they can prove that he knows that there's any relationship between Arline and R. Kelly. And so that makes Don Russell the big fish, right? So now they've got to implicate Don Russell and build on the case against Don Russell. And so Don Russell has a hearing on Thursday. Maybe we'll learn more. Maybe there'll be a superseding indictment that comes out against Don Russell. I don't know. But we know that it wasn't as simple, you know, as they're saying that it was. And then, you know, the Michael Williams, once again, he's sick. He can't attend his hearing tomorrow. I don't know what's going on with him. His plea hearing is taking place, I believe it's March 15th. So you guys know that I was waiting on the Eastern District of New York to respond to Mike Leonard's request for this discovery. Okay, and so there were some documents that were filed today that I believe was the response. I'm not exactly sure. At first, when I read it, I thought that it was in response to, and it may still be in response to, the Richard Arline. But basically, the prosecution wrote to Ann Dunley where they're basically saying that even though they offered to give the defense this information, this discovery on Friday, which is another, I thought was an interesting fight. Richard Arline today, Michael Williams tomorrow, which has been postponed. Don Russell on Thursday, and then, oh, we're going to give you the evidence on Friday. So is the reason for Friday because they were planning on giving the evidence about what Richard Arline, what Michael Williams, and what Don Russell had said and what has been entered into the record? Is that going to be a part of the discovery that they're going to give? So instead, what we got was this motion. And so it basically says, Dear Judge Donnelly, the government respectfully submits this letter to request an order requiring the defendant to preserve, to not disseminate, and at the conclusion of trial in the above referenced matter, to return all material produced pursuant to U.S. Code 18, Section 3500, as set forth below. The defendant has no right to retain such material, and such an order is appropriate in this case. A proposed order is enclosed. What the hell? Like, if the case is over with, what difference does it make about this so-called evidence that y'all have? So they go on and says that the Jinx Act does not create a right to maintain possession of any government witnesses' statements after trial. The act requires only that the government make these statements available to the defendant for the purposes of cross-examination, and defines the timing of such disclosures, United States versus Garcia. And then they have in parentheses what they're taking from that case. Jinx requires the government to produce copies of its witnesses' statements for inspection by the defense for purpose of cross-examination. It does not give defendants a property interest in such statements or require the multiplication of copies of internal prosecution notes or reports for whatever use the defendant chooses to make them. And so they have a note at the bottom that says one of Kelly's attorneys has advised that he does not consent to the proposed order, and particularly to the provision that does not allow the defendant to maintain printed copies of the material at the jail. For the reasons described herein, the government respectfully submits that the proposed order is necessary to protect the witnesses from undue harassment and will not impede the preparation of the defendant's defense at trial, internal prosecution notes, or reports for whatever use the defendant chooses to make of them. Just pulling stuff out of the air. So the Jinx Act, let me tell you guys what that is. If I can, like I say, my eyes have been bothering me. So this is from Cornell Law School, U.S. Code 3500, U.S. Code 18, Section 3500, demands for production of statements and reports of witnesses. And let me see if I can blow this up. Okay, so it says A, and this is the Jinx Act. It says A, in any criminal prosecution brought by the United States, no statement or report in the possession of the United States which was made by a government witness or prospective government witness other than the defendant shall be the subject of subpoena, discovery, or inspection until said witness has testified on direct examination in the trial of the case. And B, after a witness called by the United States has testified on direct examination, the court shall, on motion of the defendant, order the United States to produce any statement as hereinafter defined of the witness in the possession of the United States which relates to the subject matter as to which the witness has testified. If the entire contents of any such statement relate to the subject matter of the testimony of the witness, the court shall order it to be delivered directly to the defendant for his examination and use. And then C, it says, if the United States claims that any statement ordered to be produced under this section contains matter which does not relate to the subject matter of the testimony of the witness, the court shall order the United States to deliver such statement for the inspection of the court in camera. Upon such delivery, the court shall excuse the portions of such statement which do not relate to the subject matter of the testimony of the witness. With such material excised, the court shall then direct delivery of such statement to the defendant for his use. If pursuant to such procedure, any portion of such statement is withheld from the defendant and the defendant objects to such withholding and the trial is continued to an adjudication of guilt of the defendant, the entire text of such statement shall be preserved by the United States and in the event the defendant appeals shall be made available to the appellate court for the purpose of determining the correctness of the ruling of the trial judge. Whenever any statement is delivered to a defendant pursuant to this section, the court, in its discretion upon application of said defendant, may recess proceedings in the trial for such time as it may determine to be reasonably required for the examination of such statement by said defendant and his preparation for its use in trial. And then D, if the United States elects not to comply with an order of the court under subsection B or C hereof to deliver to the defendant any such statement or such portion thereof as the court may direct, the court shall strike from the record the testimony of the witness and the trial shall proceed unless the court in its discretion shall determine that the interests of justice require that a mistrial be declared. And then E, the term statement as used in subsections B, C, and D. This section in relation to any witness called by the United States means 1. A written statement made by said witness and signed or otherwise adopted or approved by him. 2. A stenographic, mechanical, electrical, or other recording or a transcription thereof, which is a substantially verbatim recital of an oral statement made by said witness and recorded contemporaneously with the making of such oral statement. Or 3. A statement, however taken or recorded, or a transcription thereof, if any, made by said witness to a grand jury. So let's go back to where we were at. Okay, so that's what the Jinx Act says. And I'm not really understanding why they're arguing about this, but it goes on in their response to say the danger proposed to witnesses as a result of the unwarranted disclosure of Jinx Act's material is significant. As set forth extensively in the government's motion for an anonymous and partially sequestered jury, which motion the court granted, and prior memoranda, the defendant has a history of obstructive conduct, including the following, and potential witnesses have already been subjected to significant harassment. So they are just going to harp on this obstruction that does not even exist. But they said, okay, in connection with this trial in state court in 2008, the defendant persuaded multiple individuals to testify falsely before a Cook County grand jury. Indeed, the indictment the defendant faces in the Northern District of Illinois charges him with conspiring to intimidate victims and conceal evidence in an effort to obstruct law enforcement, including with respect to an investigation in the 2000s that resulted in the defendant's 2008 state court trial, of which he was acquitted. Specifically, the Northern District of Illinois indictment charges that in 2001, the defendant and another individual began paying an acquaintance hundreds of thousands of dollars to collect videos of child for the purpose of concealing and covering up the existence. When the acquaintance later planned to hold a news conference to publicly announce that he had recovered the videos, the defendant and others paid approximately $170,000 in exchange. So we had heard this whole story about Lisa Van Allen and her criminal friends. So my thing is, if they felt that he had done that, why was he not charged back in the 2000s when all this allegedly took place? Why was that not brought up in the 2008 case? Like, why wasn't there a superseding indictment charging him with interfering and witness tampering and all of that? Why are we 20 years later and now all of a sudden he's this dangerous person who did all this stuff? They can't seem to explain that to us. So then the next point they make is following a civil lawsuit filed on behalf of Jane Doe number 6, which we know is Faith Rogers, against the defendant, a lawyer for Faith number 6 received a typewritten letter. So here they're talking about the whole Don Russell thing that has nothing to do with R. Kelly, because R. Kelly didn't tell Don Russell to do any of this. It says, beneath those photographs was text including, quote, I assure you this would not be considered a Sunday go-to-meeting dress, talking about whatever Faith did not have on in the picture. The next two pictures have been cropped for the sake of not exposing her extremities to the world. Based on the content of the letter, photographs, and text messages between the defendant and another individual. Once again, there is no proof that any of this, that R. Kelly was involved with any of Don Russell's shenanigans, which Don Russell has already admitted that he did. And then they talk about Don Russell saying that on August 11, 2020, a complaint was unsealed charging Donnell Russell with a pattern of harassing Jane Doe number 6. which began prior to the government investigation of the defendant but continued through January 2020 in an attempt to intimidate Jane Doe number 6 and persuade her to abandon a civil lawsuit against the defendant. Once again, they need to prove that he told Don Russell to do any of this stuff. Oh, God, it's just so stupid. So then they have a footnote on October 26, 2018 at 7:48 p.m. An individual sent a text message to the defendant and said, question, do you have a way of sending me one more picture showing her phone number at the top? I'm going to print it and include it along with the other 3 and include them in the letter to her attorney. Do you agree that she should really know her client? In response, on October 27, 2018 at 2:46 a.m., the defendant responded in a text message, I'm going to get you more. And then in the third footnote, it says, as detailed in the complaint charging Russell in late January 2020, Russell identified himself as Kelly's advisor, friend, and consultant. So once again, what does any of that have to do with R. Kelly? So then in their next point, it says, finally, several potential government witnesses have been the subject of repeated threats of physical harm, including death threats via social media posts and messages by individuals who are fans of the defendant and have no other ties to him. So if they're fans, that's not a tie to him. That's not connected to him. So how are you going to be punishing him for whatever people are saying on the internet? Like, we got the whole T.I. and Tiny thing going on where he's being tried in the court of public opinion. Like, that's what people do. People, involve themselves in things that have nothing to do with them. And they make comments and say whatever they say. They're called internet bullies, keyboard bullies. They hide behind keyboards and fake monikers and say whatever they think that they can say and get away with. So then it goes on to say, in light of the defendant's history of obstructive conduct and the involvement of others, including strangers, in schemes to harass, intimidate, and physically harm potential government witnesses, there is a significant risk that civilian and victim witnesses who may testify against the defendant may be subject to harassment or far worse. Dissemination of Jinx Act's material increases the risk to such witnesses, even if their assistance to law enforcement has previously been disclosed. Indeed, the context of Jinx Act material related to cooperating witnesses, the court in Garcia explains as follows. Now, see, this is what I think is happening with this response to the motion. They don't really care about whatever fake evidence they done conjured up. They're trying to protect the Richard Arlines and the Michael Williamses and whatever statements they have given them during these plea negotiations. That's really whose information that they're trying to protect and keep concealed until after those people get on the stand and say whatever it is that they, claim to have done or been involved with, or whatever connection that they can make to this case. So in Garcia, it says there would be cases in which a casual attitude towards the handling of 3500 material is ill-advised. In particular, the wide dissemination of statements by cooperating witnesses who are regarded as snitches or rats by their criminal associates poses obvious dangers. So who are the people that are associated, right? Who are criminal associates? You haven't charged anybody else in this case, right? Everybody else was told, tell us whatever you want to tell us, whether it's true or not, and we won't charge you. So the only criminal associates in the case are the people that they have formed indictments against: Richard Arline, Michael Williams, and Donnell Russell. So it says, it is not enough to say, as the defendants argue in this case, that the damage is done by the mere disclosure that a witness has cooperated with authorities. Hard evidence of the witness's betrayal can facilitate retaliation or intimidation of the witness. It is therefore appropriate in a case where such retaliation may be feared to restrict the circulation of such material. And then it says Garcia supplemented and gives the codes. Here the witnesses at issue are not the defendant's criminal associates, but rather victims who were exploited by the defendant and in some cases physically assaulted by the defendant, and other civilian witnesses associated with these victims. The risk of retaliation or intimidation of such witnesses is even greater than any such risk posed in cases involving cooperating witnesses. Were there not witnesses in the 2008 trial? Weren't there people that testified in the 2008 trial? I mean, you got them white gals, the sisters, what are their name? Lindsay and Jennifer, okay? One of them, Lindsay, got on the stand and said that that was him in the video. She was very clear about it. Did he threaten her? Did he intimidate her? Did he do anything to her? And according to them, you know, they remain in touch and they're still friends and they helping, you know, release music and all that stuff. So where is the support that he is going to intimidate, you know, or threaten somebody when he hasn't done it in the past? He didn't do it in the 2008 case that took 8 years, 6 years, 8 years to go to trial. He didn't intimidate any of those people, did he? No, he didn't. So how do they justify saying this now that, oh, well, we're not talking about criminal associates. We're actually talking about the witnesses that are going to testify against him. And I am sure that word got out back in May of 2019 about all these people that were going in to talk to the grand jury. There were people that actually got on social media on videos and said they had gone to talk to the grand jury. So if he didn't threaten any of those people between April and May when they were talking to the grand jury, and July when he was arrested, why would he now, you know, facing trial, facing all the seriousness of this, why would he then now go and threaten and try to intimidate people when he didn't threaten and intimidate them when he knew that they were going to talk to the grand jury? That's all I'm saying. So then it goes on to say similar motions have been made and granted in other recent trials in this district: United States versus Christian, United States versus Gill, United States versus Mays, United States versus Heron, United States versus Vaciano, which I'm sure are all probably drug lords and, you know, people like that that have shown, you know, intent to actually hurt people. So they go on with a footnote that says the distribution of any disclosed Jinx Ike's materials to any individual outside of the trial defendants, trial counsel, and their paralegals or other legal staff is strictly prohibited, and any such distribution will be met with sanctions. Moreover, I order that all Jinx Ike materials must be returned to the government within 48 hours after the completion of the trial in this matter. Like, this, stupid. Anyway, as reflected in the enclosed proposed protective order, the government intends to label Jinx Ike material for such civilian and victim witnesses as protected 3500 material, subject to additional restrictions. In this case, given the defendant's own history of obstruction and the extensive harassment, like they're just exaggerating, like if they keep writing this and writing this and writing this, that it is going to make it true. Like you can't accuse somebody of something that, you know, like label them just because you're making the accusation, it doesn't make it true. So potential government witnesses, the government respectfully submits that an order restricting the dissemination of 3500 material in this way is warranted. The government also respectfully submits that the defendant should not be permitted to retain printed copies of the protected 3500 material in the jail outside of the presence of counsel. Were the defendant permitted to do so, the government would have no means to ensure that other inmates did not access and further disseminate the material. Indeed, in light of the extensive coverage of the allegations on social media and otherwise, there is a real likelihood that if other inmates learned of the contents of the protected 3500 material, those inmates could have both the motivation and means to further disseminate the contents, and in so doing, cause significant harm to the government's witnesses. So basically, I guess they have no faith in the prisons over there to eliminate the possibility of that happening. So conclusion, for the foregoing reasons, the government motion should be granted and the court should enter the enclosed proposed order. So the order, basically was like, it is hereby ordered that, one, all materials produced by the government to the defendant pursuant to the 3500 and copies thereof, which will be called Section 3500 material, shall be returned to the government within 10 days upon conclusion of the trial. The defendant and his counsel are prohibited from disclosing or disseminating the Section 3500 material to anyone other than the defendant, his counsel, who have filed notices of appearance in the above referenced case, defense investigators or staff assisting defense counsel. Any such investigators and staff shall be informed of and shall be bound by the entirety of the order. 3, the defendant is prohibited from taking any Section 3500 material labeled protected 3500 material or any paper or electronic copies or summaries or such material into any jail facility other than in the courthouse, or from possessing such material or copies in any such facility except when reviewing the material in the presence of defense counsel or staff assisting such counsel. The defendant may, however, possess in a jail facility compact discs of the protected 3500 material and may review such material outside the presence of defense counsel or staff assisting such counsel. Protected 3500 material possessed by the defendant in any jail facility may not be printed and is subject to all restrictions set forth above in paragraph 2. Violations of those restrictions will be deemed contempt of court. So ordered. So Mike Leonard responded to this. And so his response was quick. I guess he knew it was coming, so he had already prepared it. So he says, "Dear Judge Donnelly, we respectfully submit this letter on Mr. Kelly's behalf in partial opposition to the government's motion for an order requiring the defendant to preserve, to not disseminate, and at the conclusion of the trial, the above referenced matter to return all material produced pursuant to USC 183500 and for a protective order, see docket number 88, here as set forth below, blah, 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 blah." Let's see, the government now attempts to double down. So he's saying that they're doing all this because they want to double down by seeking to block Mr. Kelly from having complete and meaningful access to those critical trial preparation materials, which the government is now begrudgingly producing on February 5th. To be clear, Mr. Kelly and his counsel have no objection to preserving, not disseminating, and returning all 3500 material. However, by way of its motion, the government also attempts to overreach and thus simultaneously seeks to bar Mr. Kelly himself from having paper copies of their discovery materials. As set forth below, the government's continued attempts to micromanage Mr. Kelly and his counsel's ability to prepare for trial should be rejected outright. As an initial matter and by way of background, Mr. Kelly's counsel attempted to resolve these narrow remaining issues by way of a meet and confer telephone conference with counsel for the government this morning, February 2nd. That effort failed, and the government immediately filed its motion. Notably, during the course of that meet and confer, the government acknowledged, one, that it has no basis for contending that Mr. Kelly has engaged in any recent conduct that could in any way be considered even an attempt at witness tampering or intimidation. Two, that the information contained within the government's expected February 5th production of 3,500 material is already widely known on the internet and throughout social media. Indeed, with regard to the latter point, the government indicated during the parties' meet and confer that if someone were to somehow obtain those witness statements with the names therein redacted, that it would be easy to match up that information with what is already publicly available. The government's admission only underscores the point that there is no legitimate basis to attempt to safeguard, including at the expense of Mr. Kelly's undeniable right to meaningfully participate in his own trial preparation process, information and identities that are already part of the public domain and widely discussed. More importantly, the government's motion wholly ignores the circumstances of Mr. Kelly's confinement as well as Mr. Kelly's own limitations. As the government well knows, Mr. Kelly has been in near lockdown conditions at virtually all times during the COVID-19 pandemic. And guys, check out the video that I did before this one where I talk about how COVID is running rampant at the MCC Chicago, and these two inmates have filed what they hope to turn into a class action lawsuit against the Bureau of Prisons because of how they have neglected the prisoners, the inmates, and not following protocol with COVID-19 and how they are handling the outbreak. So it says, therefore, the proposal put forth by the government with regard to its February 5th production is entirely unrealistic. Mr. Kelly, like all other detainees, does not have unfettered access to view discovery materials on a computer. At best, Mr. Kelly might be allowed a couple of hours per week to engage in that process, while in competition with several hundred other detainees at the MCC Chicago who likewise need access to the limited terminals in which to view discovery materials. Therefore, it is even more important that Mr. Kelly be allowed to possess paper copies of these discovery materials to allow for meaningful review and participate in his own defense. In short, the bulk of his review time will be in his cell. Furthermore, in light of Mr. Kelly's shortcomings in reading, it will clearly take him longer to review the materials. As disclosed today by the government during the above reference meet and confer, these discovery materials will be voluminous. Moreover, the government's insinuation in the motion that certain of the materials in the February 5th production will somehow allow Mr. Kelly to engage in interference with witnesses is entirely baseless and speculative, and is directly contrary to the admissions of government counsel during the parties' meet and confer, i.e. that Mr. Kelly has done nothing to suggest that he is a threat to tamper with anyone. Particularly speaking, the notion that Mr. Kelly would attempt to engage in, much less get away with, any form of witness contact, interference, or intimidation on the eve of the trial is frankly absurd. As the government itself has acknowledged to defense counsel, the entire internet and social media world is watching in addition to the government. These allegations, concerns of the government, make even less sense in light of the fact that it is agreed that Mr. Kelly can receive a disc containing the bulk of his February 5th production. In other words, one way or another, Mr. Kelly will know the identities of the witnesses either from that disc or from his counsel. Mr. Kelly poses no greater alleged threat if he has paper copies of discovery materials in his cell, and if the government is truly worried that someone will find their way into Mr. Kelly's cell and abscond with these materials, Mr. Kelly would be more than happy to allow the MCC Chicago to take them from him at the end of each night and then return them in the morning. The denial of paper copies or any other discovery materials to Mr. Kelly in his cell is entirely inconsistent with the Second Circuit's admonition that, quote, we assume that adequate opportunity for consultation with counsel will be assured as a matter of trial administration by the judges who will preside over the two trials, see United States versus Kelly, and this was the appeals court, the appeals case that they had. And it says that Mr. Kelly cannot adequately consult with his counsel under the circumstances presented or under the circumstances that the government is attempting to dictate by way of this motion. He should be allowed to thoroughly review the 3,500 and other discovery materials, including in his cell, and not under the terms and conditions of his accuser. Only then will Mr. Kelly be able to, in turn, meaningfully engage and consult with his counsel regarding these critical materials on the eve of trial. Finally, in Garcia, cited by the government in its motion, the paper copies of the 3,500 materials at issue for review by the defendant in the cell were not being produced on the very eve of trial. They were not being produced to a defendant with reading limitations. They were not being produced during a pandemic, and they were not being produced to a defendant who, because of a pandemic and lockdown conditions, otherwise had limited access to those materials. Accordingly, Garcia does not advance the government's position, nor do any of the other cases cited by the government for those very same reasons. Even if this court were to allow Garcia, however, the government's request is still too broad. The proposed order would preclude Mr. Kelly from taking any 3,500 material into a place of detention except under the direct supervision of his attorneys. As found by Garcia courts, that is unnecessary. And then he says, in one respect, however, the government request is overbroad. And this is a quote from the Garcia ruling. The proposed order precludes the defendants from taking any 3,500 material into the prisons except under the direct supervision of their attorneys. As noted, the rationale for the restraint to protect against the intimidation of lay witnesses. Not all such material presents such danger. There is, for example, no need to grant such protection to statements that reveal only the testimony and activities of law enforcement officers. Permitting the defendants to review such materials poses no danger and promotes the efficient preparation defendants seek. Employed by the government, of course, such material includes statements of police witnesses and incorporate or refer to the identity of testimony of lay witnesses. And then he cites where that was found at. And it says, for all those reasons, this court should grant in part the government's motion, but deny it to the extent that it seeks to bar Mr. Kelly from receiving and possessing paper copies of the 3,500 materials or any other discovery materials. Sincerely, Michael L. Leonard. Okay, so let me tell y'all what them folks are afraid of. prisons are full of prison attorneys, right? And so I said in my last video that there is somebody that was writing up some motions on behalf of Mr. R. Kelly. I don't know if the person was in the MCC with him, if it was somebody on the outside, but as fast as they would send the motions in, the judge who was getting them, they were actually trying to file a lawsuit against the warden of the MCC. And I don't even know if it was a lawsuit or what they was trying to do, but I know it was R. Kelly versus, or Robert Kelly versus the warden over there at the MCC. So it sounds to me like they don't want him to be able to take this stuff back to the cell for fear that there is somebody in there with some legal mindset, some legal experience. Because, right now, prisoners are appealing their own cases and getting stuff thrown out, on appeal. So I think that they're trying to prevent him from actually, because he's not getting adequate counsel right now due to COVID. He's not being able to meet with his attorney, meet with investigators, and all of that at the level he should be able to because of the pandemic. And they're happy about that. So the last thing they want is for him to actually have an extended period of time where he can sit down with somebody who's knowledgeable and who will be able to look at this information and explain to him exactly what it is. So that's the main thing that I think they don't want him to have paper copies where he can pass it on to another inmate who can go over it and then tell him what it means and how he should proceed or what he should tell his lawyers in response to it. So that's number one. And then number two, I was thinking about how Tasha K be out here with the who donating money, who writing letters, copies of emails, and what was said on the telephone calls and all of that. So maybe they scared that now that Tasha K done turned on the Clarys, that they ain't getting along and she about to expose Azriel and her mama and daddy, that maybe R. Kelly will work a deal and send some information over there to Tasha K, which I doubt he would do, because if the information gets out into the public, then they're going to know either he sent it out there or his attorneys did it. And we know that his attorneys aren't going to do it. And I don't think he would do it. So I go back to my first point, which is they are afraid that there is somebody in that MCC that is helping him, that has a legal mindset, that can decipher through this information, where he may only have 30 minutes to meet with his attorney, but he has hours to sit down with another inmate who can go over this information and tell him what it means and how he should handle it and what he should tell his attorneys and all of that. And I think that that is what they are fearful of. And I think they don't want him to know, what these other clowns are saying about him behind his back. So guys, that's it for me. I'm going to bed after this. I had a couple of more videos I want to do for y'all, but my day got delayed, and I will do those at another time. They weren't pertaining to R. Kelly. One of them, I was going to talk about PayPal and their PayPal credit, and the other was about these two little boys that are missing out of California that I believe that the police already know what's happened. They're just building their case against the parents, but I'll bring those to you guys later this week. So that's it for me. Leave your comments below. Let me know what you think about, everything that's taking place, that's transpiring. Leave your comments below, rate the video, and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so already. And until the next time, I shall talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.